Now we come to was the core of our meeting really is the prepared speeches. I would, on some of your sheets, you have some information missing. On other sheets, I filled it in by hand. This is on speech number 2. The title of the speech is School Days, and days is spelled D-A-Z-E. And the time for that should be 8 to 10 minutes. Also, under speech evaluation for speaker 2, Brendan O'Brien, the time is should be always half. For an evaluation is half the time allotted for the speech, so it should be 4 to 5 minutes. And finally, this last minute change. The table topics person is Leslie Corin Ash, my wife. So there we have the changes. For speech number 1 will be given by Aline Zolbard, and her objectives first will be read by Mary Alice Richardson, and also my notes contained all the information that people sent to me for their introduction. So Mary Alice and Aline need no introduction, or at least they won't get any. Sorry.
All right, Aline's speech is titled Expanding Our Ideas About Sexual Trauma. It's a not in the manual speech. The time is 6 to 8 minutes. Her goals are to make people curious about a new concept, to be clear, to get feedback on whether what she said is clear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pass this around, you want to hold it?
I think you should pass. Well, Lynette and Sarah, this is not going to be my typical organized speech, so don't assume this is the way things go here, because I'm kind of embarrassed. And I know I'm not supposed to start that way, but anyway. I have this idea about people having sexual trauma and they don't realize it's sexual trauma. And it has to do with the fact that 40% of the people in this country, and probably internationally, have grown up in families with what is called adverse childhood experiences. And adverse childhood experiences are things not just like overt sexual trauma, which would be molestation or rape or incest, but also things like physical violence done to you, physical violence between other people in your family, emotional violence and victimization, and neglect. And I have always clinically noticed how often this is going on in society, but in 1998 we started getting very concrete data about how insidious and insanely prevalent these kinds of horrible family incidents are. A guy named Vincent Felitti worked at Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco, and he's the head of he headed up their medical section. They have mental health, but he was a physician, he still is a physician, and he got 18,000 of their medical patients to fill in questionnaires about what kind of childhood experiences they had had. And he collected all this data. First time around, he didn't actually look at neglect. He didn't count it. They do now. And he didn't look at family violence between, he didn't look at witnessing family violence, but he looked at all these other aspects. And the data is so shocking and startling and upsetting. The data is somewhere around 25% of women had overt sexual abuse. About 11% had emotional abuse. Another 10% had physical abuse. And he also collected some data on growing up with parents who were emotionally ill and with addiction. But just those things I'm mentioning, when you add it up, comes up to almost 40% of the population. And then he collected how many different kinds of abuse people had had. And then he correlated it with medical illness and death. And he found that the more trauma you had, the worse your physical health was, and the earlier you were inclined to die. So he did his huge study just about at the time where I wrote a book that I published in 1998. And I have been talking about the fact that all of these kinds of trauma all land in your body. And that's what these body maps are showing. So I get people to draw a picture of how they feel about being touched in their body by someone they love and trust. And it's a traffic light key for what the colors mean. So green means, yes, touch me there, I really like it, and red means, no, do not touch me here, and yellow means, it depends. And I can tell things about people's childhood that they don't even realize from looking at these body maps. And that is because memories are stored in what's called implicit memory. They're stored in your body. They're not stored in your literal linear memory that's in this part of your head. They're stored in sensation and feeling in this part of your brain. This should be this part of your brain. And these two parts of the brain often do not talk to each other. So there are hundreds of thousands, millions of people who do not like to be touched very much, and they don't necessarily understand why it is that they don't like to be touched. So for the people who had overt sexual abuse, they get it. I mean, most of them have not completely blacked out on what happened to them, so they know they have some memories in their body. They can attach it to something. But then there are many, many, many people who also were either neglected or who witnessed violence from one parent to another, or who had emotional abuse, and those memories are also stored in their body. And the reason this is so important is because touch is so important to enjoying sexuality. I know in here I have talked about Helen Fisher. Helen Fisher is a very brilliant anthropologist who studied the different stages of lust and love, and what she found is in the very beginning of a relationship, you have a lot of hormones and neurotransmitters that basically make you insanely in love and love touch. And it's part of survival of the species. So no matter what's stored in your body in the first 2 years of a relationship, when you are in that lust stage, pretty much everything feels good for a lot of people. And then those feelings go away and you wind up in another hormonal system. And so I see all these people who used to think they really loved touch and they really loved sex, and then later on, all of a sudden they don't know what happened to them, that they don't want to be touched and they are not interested in sex. And we have a lot of data about how important touch is to loving sex. It's especially important for women because women need a lot of foreplay, but it's important to men too. So there was a French study that showed that, and it was a study of thousands of people, and it said foreplay was important, very important, or essential for 89% of the people in this study. So if you have, so let me go back to these body maps. So this guy, I call him Adam, and he was a lucky guy. He had no trauma. He pretty much likes being touched everywhere. Not everyone is that green, but he's a lucky guy. But most people, they might have red on their homes or something. Even us. This person, I call her Avery, because she's Avery woman, pretty much, because women do not like to be approached with their primary erogenous zones right away, especially not past the first, the first 2 years maybe, because you're all turned on. But later on, I have to stop. Anyway, developmental sexual trauma is what I call it when you have sexual trauma in your body from non-sexual things, but it causes sexual trauma. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aline.